One important issue that our students are trying to tackle today is the immigration bill that also targets students. As a conservative, I'm obviously in favor of a restricted plan on immigration, of a controlled, efficient immigration, where only hard-working and intelligent individuals will come here to contribute vitally to the British economy. To quote my dear Professor Alexander Kazimierz, nationhood is not defined by the biological factor, it is defined by culture. Culture is indeed influenced by immigration. So we need to keep that in mind while I build up my argument. Obviously, the official stance of conservative is to restore the immigration system. So there are certain parts that need to be addressed. For example, the annual limit on the EU economic migration will not only reduce will reduce immigration to sustainable levels, which is obviously linked to the housing problem, which I will return on a later basis. It will also target key individuals that can become investors and can occupy vital place in consultation with business. Secondly, a properly controlled, regulated student visa system is also important. But here I would like to make a point. The means test that is proposed at the moment should be treated with caution by both parties, both the students and the institutional bodies. Obviously, a good command of English, a good knowledge about the subject the student is intending to study are key requirements which universities also require. But at the same time, we need to look at people who actually produce these means tests. These need to be sensible, well-prepared people who can judge whether a person is fit or not to integrate and live within British society. Another very important plan is the non-EU economic migration. People do come here to work. It is a reality we need to understand. But at the same time, they cannot do it at the taxpayer's expense. They need to do it on their own initiative. They need to pay into the system and help develop the British economy. Employers, firstly, regarding this question, must look at the local communities in order to recruit their employees before looking at external labor forces. Again, an official plan is to tighten.
1 minute left.
Thank you, Patrick. An official plan is to tighten the border controls and secure an efficient border. We are all familiar with the policies here, but what this committee suggests is that communication should be enabled between embassies and official bodies of certain countries and targeted immigration source countries. The communication between the two parties, Britain and those countries, will therefore enable the migration of the proper labour force, of the one that will help both the EU economy and the British economy. To conclude, I would like to return on the housing dilemma. Obviously, there is a housing shortage, and this is a massive issue when we are confronted with immigration. But again, there is a plan in place by the government to actually tackle that. Thank you.
We all know an international student,
And if we don't, then we will see our fellow international students in the hub, on the street, where we live in our halls of residence, or in our courses, and we don't think anything of it, because why would we? Be international, EU, or a home student, when we're all living together, we just see each other as students. We just see as fellow young people, or mature students, or fellow people just trying to better themselves academically for more brighter future prospects. We just see ourselves as fellow students. However, we are seeing another attack on education in the form of this bill, as it's attacking our fellow peers. For international students who have made the brave journey from their home country to another continent to study in a new environment, to study in a new culture, they are being faced with a trio of policies that will be significantly detrimental to their stay and study in Britain. For example, when did private landlords become immigration control? This is what's being advocated in the bill. When making private landlords carry out immigration checks, the government will be pushing the duties of the state onto ordinary citizens in an effort to cut down the workload and accountability of the government itself. Theresa May from the Home Office, one of the main sponsors of this bill, complained how the previous government had, quote, created a separate entity in the UK border force to get a grip on border checks. I find this statement baffling because that's exactly what she's going to implement if her desire is seen through. She will be creating an unofficial separate entity in terms of making private landlords check visas opposed to border controls doing so. Now, what's actually going to happen in real life is that landlords, or some landlords, will dismiss international students' applications on the sole basis of they can't be bothered to do the paperwork. So international students will be pigeonholed and marginalised to stay in halls of residence where it's more expensive because of the fear that they can't get into a private house with their friends because private landlords will just dismiss them. In addition, the dismissal of the rights to appeal in the UK for international students is ludicrous. What of the international students for several reasons who are unable to get their visas in on time and are told they have to go home and leave the country? Having this kind of zero tolerance attitude will only be unfair, as it dismisses the human factors for which could contribute to the delay of getting visas on time, ranging from family-related reasons, social factors, and maybe medically being unable to, etc., etc. But how can we determine legitimate and illegitimate reasons if we get rid of due process? There's a reason why it was there in the first place. Now, I'm happy to be part of this campaign, as it is illustrating how we as a student union care about the welfare of our fellow students.
1 minute left.
Thank you very much. Regardless of nationality, but let's actually take this opportunity to use this as a springboard to truly look after the welfare of our international students. We have all rallied together in the student union under the banner that we will not stand for the government attacking and marginalising our international fellow students, but what of our own university? International students pay more than any other student, and I fear are being seen as a means of solely generating income and a prestige symbol, and not as people with aspirations. We need to defend international students from both Westminster and university management. Even if the bill does get passed, let's make sure this campaign is not the be-all and end-all. We should carry on and keep on fighting. And let me conclude with that I have come across home students who feel animosity towards international students due to what they see as the student union fighting on behalf of international students' interests, but not home students' interests. Let me say to those students that the frustration should not be pointed to fellow students, but instead channeled and organised to people.
A round of applause for him.
We believe that leaving the EU is very important, because at its heart, the European Union is a free market, laissez-faire institution which prevents the exploitation of workers by supporting a bosses club which allows the deregulation of markets, to get rid of tax, import and export tax, to outsource work to other people, and to undercut the working wage of people both here and abroad as well. So it's essentially a pro-austerity, right-wing capitalist organisation. And for those reasons, the Socialist Party would be against it, of course. They say that we joined the EU for very humanitarian reasons following the war, you know, and there were good intentions there, but it's actually been manipulated into a tool in order to allow capitalists to increase their profit. This has been shown through the Eurozone crisis and the failings of capitalism. This isn't an immigration issue, which is often people blame the wrong people. They often blame EU for immigration issues. We need to blame the people that are really responsible for what the Europe and the entire global crisis, its bankers and bosses, and essentially can be summed up with greed, really. Being anti-EU shouldn't just be the preserve of the right wing, like UKIP, for example, who are a populist party, many of whom have actually left from the Conservative Party, so make what you will of that. But we are against the EU for socialist reasons, for the principles to represent the broad working class people across Europe and the world, because we have more in common with ourselves, and we are exploited in the same way by a small minority of people at the top, and those are the people that are in charge of the European Union. The European Union has a democratic deficit. At its formation, there was no accountability. It's only recently that we have this European Parliament. But the real decisions are made by the Council of Ministers. These ministers are delegated from their political parties to push an agenda which supports big business. It's no surprise that CBI, the huge conglomerate supporter of large multinational corporations, is asking all the major parties, you know, what's your stance on the EU? What's your stance on the EU? Because they're concerned. Because the EU for so long has not been a tool of social mobility or progress. It's actually been in support of profiteering and exploiting people. We need to see the EU for what it is. It's not encouraging European unity. It's actually encouraging more nationalism as people turn to their neighbours and ask, you know, oh, why am I paying for this? What's happening here? Instead of blaming the people that are actually in charge. That's what was seen in Greece through the economic crisis. You could see on the protests, the people on the ground that were suffering the most, on their placards, they were blaming European Union legislation for what was happening and pro-austerity movements. Directives from the European Union support the privatisation of the NHS and Royal Mail. We need to see the EU for what it is. It's a trading bloc so that the rich can compete on a global market far more easily than ever before, which was one of the reasons that Thatcher supported it, and increase their profits. Lastly, I'd just like to say, you have to remember this. Labour and Tory, historically, they've been pro, they've been against, they change where they're coming from. They debate among themselves, but they're all essentially mainstream capitalists, and they all support the same system. We represent the interests of the majority of working class people, the everyday British people and European people who are just trying to get by. The EU is just another tool to further capitalism and greed, and that's why the Socialist Party fully support a united Europe of workers, but not the European Union. Thank you very much.
Een round of applause for her.
The Conservative Party has pledged that if they get re-elected in 2015, there will be negotiations from within the European Union on Britain's place in Europe and a restructure. And then after those negotiations have taken place, in 2017, there will be an in-out referendum. So the people can decide whether Britain's new place in this new European Union is correct for them. The negotiations have to take place before any in-out referendum, unlike what UKIP is currently suggesting. It needs to be reformed for the over-bureaucratic mess that it has. It was formed in order to create peace across Europe. After wars have started, with so much bloodshed in both the world wars, so it's important to keep peace. That's where the EU should come in. And in order for there to be peace, there needs to be a cut down in that bureaucracy, which contains 34,000 bureaucrats. And we also need to cut the amount of finance in the EU, the money. Britain alone in 2012 contributed 11.2 billion and only received 6.5 billion in return. And the Conservative Party within Europe has launched an audit to see where monetary waste is occurring and how to tackle that. That will be released at the end of this year, and from that we can help form and renegotiate our position in the EU and change it. And on top of money, Conservatives, along with other countries and their leadership, managed to cut down the EU budget for the first time. Bit more about the referendum. People have a right to say their view and the position of Britain in Europe. And hopefully after the negotiations, Britain will become a key global player again, being one of the key renegotiators in the reformation of Europe. The referendum itself in Britain will help create a better political area. Because the EU is such a core hot topic at the moment, it will help political participation, whether referendums, protests, gaining an interest. With an EU referendum, there will be greater publicity, greater sharing of facts, cutting out the myths to create a genuine picture. And with that genuine picture, the British people, the electorate, have a right to decide their fate, to be in this new formed Europe or to stand there being alone in Britain. And for those who say we should just leave the EU and stay in the common market, yes, we'd be in a free market, the common market, but we would have no say in the controls over it. So it would be key to become...
1 minute left.
Thank you. So, in order to shape and further the free market, which has helped benefit the country and the Eurozone, then we need to be part of the EU. So, the 2015 pledge, in order for the referendum to occur and renegotiations, this needs to be done. Conservatives need to be voted in for this to happen. No other party can offer renegotiations. No other party can realistically apply a referendum on Europe.
Well, I think that taxes should be as less as possible, and I think that the idea of increasing taxes is just penalizing people for being successful. Government doesn't create prosperity, free market and free people create prosperity. Economic freedom is the only force that have been, the economic freedom, it was the only force in the history that is constantly succeeding and lifting people out of poverty. It is the only principle that has sustained prosperity. Our economic freedom is constantly under the attack by the socialistic ideas for increased taxation. Well, by the very nature, taxes reduce our freedom. Their only role in a free economic is to fund services which are absolutely essential for the society, such as education, national security, and providing goods for people who cannot care for themselves. But yet again, the socialists want to increase the taxations. Well, what's the point of that? What's the wrong? Well, when the government, rather than the market, routinely select winners or losers, or put its hands on the scale of justice, then the enterprise and entrepreneurs cannot predict their prospects. When the heavy hand of government replaces the invisible hand of the market, economic freedom is is the unventionable victim. The real cause behind huge taxes and government regulation isn't just the slow economic growth. It is the businesses that are never started, the ideas that are never pursued, and the dreams that are permanently deferred. As the government takes more and more, there is less and less for the people. My concern against high taxation is not only economical. I have moral doubts as well. The taxes are coercive. Everybody has to give a little to receive the benefits that the government is providing. But when politicians in Westminster or in Brussels are asking you to give 30 or 40% of your income, they need to use force to do that, actually. And to use coercion, the coercion is evil, and we must have as little coercion as possible. It is coercion by people who believe that their values should prevail than ours, that their values are better. I think that everybody has his own opinion, and no one should stand on the other. I don't believe that it's good to live in society which forces you to pay for things you morally disagree. Somebody may disagree to pay taxes which will sponsor foreign wars, or for bank bailouts, or some other may disagree about to pay taxes which sponsor abortion. Nobody should do that. Nobody should be allowed to do that. In the idea in a free society, I would much rather prefer to live in a society which gives the people opportunity to change their status and become rich, than stay in the same position and never change their status and never receive any opportunity to change their life. And that's about my speech.
Thank you.
The question is, how do you decide how much to tax and how those taxes are used? And that's where having a democratic system is so crucial. You're talking about the fact that we are in a position where there'll be decisions that we might disagree with. That's in the nature of those that are responsible for administering the taxation that is collected, whether you're national government or in this case in Coventry in terms of local government. And I think there are more important questions about how do citizens get involved in discussing some of those choices that are being made. In Coventry, we will run regular meetings with residents. We will have an election every 3 years out of 4 in which people have the choice to elect their local representatives. And that's where decisions about how taxation, the resources that are raised through taxation are best decided. If you do not have a democratic system, I could agree with you entirely, and we've seen it time and time again, how those resources can be wasted and distributed in a way which is unacceptable. The assumption that you make, though, is that somehow this is a value-free world in which people have every opportunity, whoever they are, to become successful and to make money, and that the money that they make is entirely down to their personal abilities. So you're a billionaire and you've done a billionaire's worth of work. Tosh. Doesn't happen at all. Largely speaking, that's because of the inequalities within our system. It was often said to me that if you had the choice when you were born, knowing that you had a 0.01% chance of being a millionaire, or you had a 98% chance of being one of the poorest in the world, would you choose to take that risk of being one of the richest? Or would you go and say, look, actually, given that I don't know where I'm going to be, I'll go for the average. And I think if you think of it in that sense, most of us would choose to be not particularly well off, but not badly off either. We would be towards the average. And I think that's the world in which we are clearly living when it comes to taxation. What we're trying to do is we're trying to even out so that those people who are, for various reasons, are the least advantaged have a chance to ensure that they have a civilised life. And what we're doing is taxing those that have exploited the system time and time again in order to be able to contribute even more than would be otherwise, that they will be more heavily taxed so they can make their contribution towards society. But it is about the choices. It's about what politics is there for. And I'd much rather that we have those democratic systems in order to be able to identify those priorities rather than having one person, and this of course is me, having one person who's in charge to make those decisions for us.
Thank you. Round of applause.